Hello, my darlings. Before we dive into this tale of a woman deemed unsuitable who proved she was extraordinary, I must ask something from my heart. If you've stumbled upon the Duchess's secret and found yourself moved by these stories of love against all odds, would you consider subscribing? Every like, every subscription, every comment telling me where you're watching from. It keeps these stories alive and helps me bring you more tales of hearts brave enough to defy their world. Your support means everything. He called her unsuitable, a blacksmith's granddaughter with ink-stained fingers and dangerous ideas. But when Duke Archie Walton discovered the brilliant mind behind the anonymous reform pamphlets shaking Parliament, everything he thought he knew about suitability shattered. The Bristol assembly rooms glittered like a jewel box that late autumn evening in 1894. Crystal chandeliers caught the glow of gas lamps, scattering light across silk gowns and polished marble floors. The air hung thick with expensive perfume, champagne, and the particular smugness that accompanied charitable endeavors undertaken by those who would never need charity themselves. Lady Cayley Blackburn stood at the edge of the crowd, acutely aware that her green silk gown, last season's, altered by her own hands to disguise its age, marked her as precisely what she was, a woman clinging to the lowest rung of respectability. She tucked her hands behind her back, conscious of the ink stains no amount of scrubbing could entirely remove from her fingers. "You're doing that thing again," Miss Judith Hartley murmured beside her, practical as always in her modest gray dress. The vicar's daughter had been Cayley's closest friend since childhood, one of the few who never treated her blacksmith heritage as a shameful secret. That thing where you look as though you're calculating how many workhouse meals could be purchased with the cost of Lady Pemberton's diamonds. "Roughly 400, Cayley whispered back. "For a month." Judith's mouth twitched, but her eyes remained watchful. She knew her friend's temper as well as anyone. At the front of the room, the auctioneer's gavel had fallen silent. In its place rose a man whose very presence seemed to command the space around him. Duke Archie Walton. Even Cayley, who prided herself on her indifference to aristocratic pretension, could not deny the power of his bearing. 34 years old, tall and classically handsome, with steel-gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His lineage stretched back to the Plantagenets, his Somerset estates were vast, and his evening attire was so impeccably tailored it might have been painted onto him. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried effortlessly across the hushed assembly, rich and assured. "I stand before you tonight to lend my support to the Duke of Somerton's proposed workhouse scheme. A practical solution to a persistent problem, practical charity for those who have proven themselves unable to manage their own affairs." Cayley's jaw tightened. "These institutions," the Duke continued, warming to his subject, "will separate the deserving from the undeserving poor, providing structure and labor to those who lack the moral fiber to provide for themselves. Children will learn discipline, families will learn the value of honest work, and society will be protected from the disorder that inevitably follows when the lower classes are left to their own devices." The assembly murmured approval. Heads nodded. A smattering of applause began. Cayley's restraint, never her strongest virtue, shattered. "Practical charity?" Her voice rang out clear and sharp as broken glass. "Your grace means practical cruelty." 300 faces turned as one. The applause died as though strangled. Duke Walton's gray eyes found her across the room, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder, more dangerous. He descended from the platform with measured steps, the crowd parting before him like water. "I have researched the Duke of Somerton's scheme thoroughly," Cayley continued. her heart hammering but her voice steady. Children as young as 7 forced into 12-hour factory shifts. Families deliberately separated to break their bonds. Conditions designed not to rehabilitate but to punish poverty itself, as though being poor were a moral failing rather than an economic reality. The Duke stopped 3 paces from her. Up close, he was even more imposing, all controlled power and aristocratic certainty. When he spoke, his voice was soft, which somehow made it more terrible. "And who might you be to lecture your betters on matters of social policy?" Kaylee lifted her chin. "Lady Kaylee Blackburn. My mother married a baron, though she was born a blacksmith's daughter. Perhaps that gives me a perspective. Your Grace lacks the ability to see the poor as human beings rather than problems to be managed." A collective intake of breath swept through the assembly. The Duke's eyes traveled over her deliberately, her altered gown, her ink-stained fingers, the defiant set of her shoulders. When he spoke again, his words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this moment. "I see. A blacksmith's granddaughter with pretensions to understanding matters far beyond her station." He raised his voice so the entire room could hear. "You are, madam, utterly unsuitable to comment on matters beyond your understanding, much less suitable to be anyone's wife. No breeding, no refinement, no comprehension of your proper place." Perhaps when you have acquired some humility along with your opinions, you will understand why those of us with actual responsibility for society's welfare must make difficult decisions. The explosion of whispered scandal was instantaneous. Fans snapped open, matrons clutched their pearls, young ladies giggled behind gloved hands. At the side of the room, Kaylee's mother stood frozen, her face drained of color, one hand pressed to her throat as though she could not breathe. "Come." Judith's hand was on Kaylee's arm, urgent but gentle. "Come now, before this gets worse." But Kaylee stood rooted, staring at the Duke as fury and humiliation warred in her chest. How dare he? How dare he reduce her arguments to her bloodline, her worth to her marriageability, her humanity to her place in his rigid, suffocating hierarchy? Yet even through her rage, she caught something in his eyes, a flicker, there and gone, that might have been doubt, or perhaps regret. Or perhaps she imagined it entirely. "Kaylee," Judith pulled harder. "Please." This time, Kaylee allowed herself to be led away. She held her head high as she walked through the gauntlet of stares and whispers, though her vision blurred and her hands trembled. The crowd parted around her as though she carried contagion. Behind her, she heard the Duke's voice resume, smooth as silk. "Now, as I was saying about the workhouse scheme." Outside in the cold November air, Judith wrapped her shawl around Kaylee's shaking shoulders. "That man," she said quietly, "has just made you unmarriageable in all of Bristol society, perhaps in all of England." Kaylee drew a shuddering breath, tasting fury like copper on her tongue. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "Then perhaps Bristol society deserves the pamphlet I'm writing." Above them, the assembly rooms blazed with light and music and the comfortable certainty of people who had never questioned their place in the world. Below, in the darkened street, Kaylee Blackburn began to plan her revenge. Not with tears or apologies or retreat, but with words that would shake the very foundations Duke Archie Walton stood upon. 3 days later, the Blackburn cottage sat quiet in the weak November sunlight. Modest but tidy, positioned on the outskirts of what had once been the Baron's small estate, it had become Kaylee's fortress and prison both. Inside, her workspace overflowed with books stacked on every surface, research papers threatening to avalanche from chairs, newspapers marked with urgent annotations in her tight, precise hand. "Another invitation withdrawn," her mother said quietly from the doorway, holding a cream envelope. Margaret Blackburn had aged 10 years in 3 days, worry etching deeper lines around her eyes. "Lady Pemberton's winter ball. She claims illness in the family, but we both know the truth." Kaylee didn't look up from her writing desk. "Then we are spared an evening of insipid conversation and watered champagne." "Kaylee," her mother's voice trembled. "No one visits anymore, not even the Hartleys, except Judith, and she comes through the garden gate like a conspirator. Your reputation was built on a foundation of pretense, Mother. Perhaps it's a relief to stop pretending I belong in their world." Margaret set the envelope down with shaking hands and withdrew. Kaylee closed her eyes, guilt and defiance warring in her chest. She knew what she was costing her mother, but she also knew what was at stake. She turned back to the papers before her. Rows of figures, projected mortality rates, statistical analyses of the Duke of Somerton's workhouse scheme that would make even the most hardened industrialist blanch. At the top of the manuscript, written in her careful hand, "The Duke of Somerton's Workhouse, a Mathematical Analysis of Projected Mortality by K.B. Truth." For 6 months, that name had been appearing on pamphlets throughout Bristol and London, each one a devastating exposé of workhouse abuses and child labor conditions. K.B. Truth's identity remained unknown, but the impact was undeniable. Factory workers slipped her information. Disgruntled overseers provided insider testimony. And Kaylee transformed their raw pain into irrefutable logic, statistics that couldn't be dismissed as mere sentiment. The garden gate creaked. Moments later, Judith appeared, slightly breathless, carrying a leather satchel. "You shouldn't keep coming," Kaylee said, though relief flooded through her. "Your father's position—" "My father," Judith interrupted firmly, "taught me that righteousness matters more than reputation, though he doesn't know I'm carrying these." She pulled advance copies of the latest Truth pamphlet from her satchel, part of the underground distribution network that had formed around Kaylee's work. "It's your best yet," Judith continued, settling into the chair across from Kaylee. "The mathematics are brutal, but there's more news. Parliament has formed a committee to investigate workhouse conditions. 2 MPs specifically cited Truth's pamphlets as their evidence." Kaylee's hand stilled on her pen. "Truly?" "Your words are changing things, Kay. Perhaps not in Bristol drawing rooms, but where it actually matters." For the first time in 3 days, something warm unfurled in Kaylee's chest. Not vindication, she'd never written for that. But hope, perhaps, that the humiliation might serve some greater purpose. In his study 30 miles away, Duke Archie Walton read the same pamphlet with a frown deepening between his dark brows. The fire crackled in the grate, but he barely noticed the warmth. His estate sprawled around him, generations of Walton wealth and privilege. Yet for the first time in his life, he felt the ground shifting beneath his certainty. The mathematics were irrefutable, the logic devastating. K.B. Truth had taken the Duke of Somerton's workhouse scheme and dissected it with surgical precision, exposing projected mortality rates that would kill an estimated 300 children in the first year alone. Damn the man. Or woman. Whoever Truth was, they possessed a mind of remarkable clarity. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His secretary, Jonathan Pierce, entered with an expression Archie recognized, the look of a man bearing news his employer wouldn't welcome. "Your Grace, I've completed the investigation you requested. into KB Truth's identity. Archie set down the pamphlet. Go on. Lady Kaylee Blackburn, Your Grace. The room seemed to tilt. That's impossible. I assure you, it's not. Jonathan laid out his evidence with practiced efficiency, writing style analysis comparing her known correspondence with Truth's pamphlets, connections to sources traced back to her late grandfather's blacksmith shop, timing of publications matching her known movements. Furthermore, Your Grace, your aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Somerton, has been secretly funding Lady Kaylee's work, providing access to financial records and insider information about her nephew's scheme. Archie stared at his secretary, then at the pamphlet, then back again. The unsuitable woman with ink-stained fingers, the blacksmith's granddaughter he'd publicly humiliated. She was the brilliant voice forcing parliamentary reform, dismantling his defense of Somerton's scheme with mathematics he couldn't refute, and his aunt, his own aunt, had been aiding her. That will be all, Jonathan. Alone, Archie picked up the pamphlet again. He remembered her at the assembly, violet gray eyes blazing with conviction as she'd spoken of children in 12-hour shifts. He'd dismissed her as emotional, unsuitable, ignorant. Instead, she'd been the most informed person in the room. Those ink-stained fingers weren't evidence of carelessness. They were evidence of tireless work. His pride warred with something else, something uncomfortably like admiration, tangled with attraction he'd been trying to ignore since that night. He'd called her unsuitable, but perhaps what truly made her unsuitable was that she was far better than he deserved. Archie stood abruptly, his decision crystallizing. If her claims were true, if Somerton's workhouses were truly the death traps she calculated, then he needed to see for himself. Not as a duke reviewing charitable works, but as a man who had just discovered he might be catastrophically wrong. Sir Edmund Thorne had built his fortune on understanding what people needed and how much they'd sacrifice to get it. At 45, he owned 7 textile mills across England, each one profitable precisely because he knew how to extract maximum labor for minimum cost. But wealth alone didn't satisfy him. He collected rare things, Renaissance art, illuminated manuscripts, and, most precious of all, talented people whose gifts could be bent to his purposes. For 6 months, KB Truth had been his obsession. Not to silence. He was too clever for that. To own, to control, to harness that brilliant mind for his own ascent to Parliament. And now, finally, he knew exactly who Truth was. The Blackburn cottage looked shabby in the afternoon light, its genteel poverty obvious to his practiced eye. Perfect. Desperation, he'd learned, made people pliable. Kaylee answered the door herself, another sign of reduced circumstances. No servants. Her expression shifted from surprise to wariness when she recognized him. Sir Edmund, I wasn't expecting. Forgive the intrusion, Lady Kaylee. His smile was warm, his bow impeccable. He extended a bouquet of hothouse roses, absurdly expensive for November. I hoped we might speak privately about your remarkable mind. Something cold flickered in her violet-gray eyes, but breeding one out. She stepped aside, allowing him into the modest sitting room where her mother hovered anxiously. Mrs. Blackburn, what a pleasure. Might I borrow your daughter for a moment? A matter of business that might interest her. Margaret glanced between them, uncertain, but withdrew. Kaylee remained standing, spine rigid. I'll be direct, Thorne said, settling into the best chair without invitation. I know your KB Truth. Please, don't waste both our time with denials. My investigator is quite thorough. Kaylee's face went pale, then flushed with anger. If you've come to threaten? My dear girl, I've come to offer partnership. He pulled documents from his coat. I've recently purchased certain debts. The mortgage on this cottage, your mother's small pension arrangement with her late husband's estate, all now under my stewardship. The paper crackled in the silent room. Kaylee's hands clenched at her sides. I'm proposing marriage, Thorne continued pleasantly. You'd continue your research, of course, under appropriate guidance. Your brilliant analyses directed toward more constructive ends. Factory reform, perhaps, but measured reform. The kind that doesn't damage industrial interests. In exchange, your mother lives comfortably. This cottage remains yours, and you'd have resources you couldn't dream of now. You want to control what I write. Her voice shook with fury. To turn my work into propaganda for your political ambitions. I want to elevate your work to where it can truly matter. Surely that's preferable to watching your mother lose her home. He stood, smoothing his waistcoat. Think practically, Lady Kaylee. You have no prospects, no fortune. After the Duke of Walton's public pronouncement, no respectable man would consider you. I'm offering security when you have none. Get out. I'll give you 1 week to reconsider. He moved toward the door, pausing to let his gaze linger on the threadbare carpet, the faded curtains. Think about your mother's comfort in her declining years. Consider carefully which battles are worth fighting when you have so much to lose. He left whistling, confident as a man holding all the cards. 30 miles away, Duke Archie Walton stood in his third workhouse, wearing plain clothes that disguised his rank. The stench hit him first. Unwashed bodies, industrial chemicals, despair. Then the sounds. Coughing that never stopped, the clatter of machinery, a child's quiet sobbing. In the textile room, children no older than 7 sat hunched over looms, their small fingers bleeding from repetitive work. Archie watched a girl, 9, perhaps, struggle with thread that kept breaking. When she finally succeeded, her shoulders sagged with relief so profound it made his chest ache. How long is their shift? He asked a worker nearby, an older woman with suspicious eyes. 12 hours, same as us. She glanced toward the overseer before adding quietly, someone finally wrote the truth about this place. Them pamphlets. Truth, they call themselves. First time anyone from Quality actually cared enough to look. Archie felt something crack inside him. Not his pride. That had shattered already. Something deeper. The comfortable certainty that had let him defend this horror without question. In the family separation wing, mothers wept behind locked doors, prevented from seeing children classified as able workers. The elderly lay in rows of narrow beds, fed gruel insufficient to sustain them, waiting to die so they'd stop being burdens on the parish. Every word in Kaylee Blackburn's pamphlet had been true, every statistic accurate, every projection of mortality rates conservative, if anything. And he'd called her unsuitable. His aunt received him in her townhouse drawing room that evening, unsurprised by his visit. You knew, Archie said without preamble. You knew what Somerton's workhouses were, and you funded the woman exposing him. The Dowager Duchess of Somerton sipped her tea calmly. Someone needed to force our class to see reality, Archibald. That girl has more integrity in her ink-stained fingers than most peers in their entire lineage. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have listened? Or would you have dismissed her as emotional, unsuitable? Beneath consideration? Her gaze sharpened. You visited the workhouses yourself, I take it. Finally seen what you were defending. Archie sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Every word she wrote was true. Of course it was. Kaylee Blackburn is incapable of intellectual dishonesty. His aunt set down her teacup with deliberate care. Which is why you need to know. Edmund Thorne is also searching for Truth's identity. He may have found her already. Ice flooded Archie's veins. Thorne? The industrialist? Who seeks a parliamentary seat and views talented people as acquisitions? She held his gaze. Edmund Thorne doesn't accept refusal, Archibald. Whatever he wants from that girl, he'll use every weapon at his disposal to obtain it, and she has very few defenses. Archie was already standing, his mind racing. Where does she live? The carriage ride back to his estate passed in fragments of thought, each one sharper than the last. Kaylee Blackburn was in danger. From a man who purchased people like livestock, who would bind her brilliant mind to his own ambitions and call it marriage. Archie paced his study until Jonathan appeared with the morning correspondence. Your Grace, if I may suggest, a formal apology might ease. I'm considering something more substantial. Jonathan's eyebrows rose, but he remained silent. 30 years of service had taught him when his employer's mind was made up. The debate raged in Archie's head through the night. Duty warred with pride. He'd been catastrophically wrong, publicly cruel, and morally blind. But more than correcting his mistake, Kaylee Blackburn needed protection she couldn't provide herself. And if he was honest, truly honest, the memory of her blazing eyes wouldn't leave him alone. By dawn, his decision crystallized. He would intervene. He told himself it was about justice. He almost believed it. The Duke of Walton's carriage stopping before the Blackburn cottage caused curtains to twitch in every neighboring window. Margaret opened the door, her face cycling through shock, fear, and brittle wariness. Your Grace, I cannot imagine what brings you here. I need to speak with your daughter. It concerns Sir Edmund Thorne. Margaret's expression shifted to something harder. Lady Kaylee is not receiving visitors. Mother, who... Kaylee appeared in the hallway, still in her morning dress, ink staining her cuffs. She froze when she saw him. Absolutely not. Whatever you have to say involves information about Thorne's intentions that you need to hear. Please, Lady Kaylee, give me 10 minutes. Something in his tone, urgency without arrogance, made her hesitate. Finally, she stepped aside with visible reluctance. The parlor was exactly as he'd imagined. Books stacked on every surface, research papers organized in careful piles, the air smelling of ink and old paper. This was the workspace of a formidable mind. He'd dismissed it all as unsuitable. You have 8 minutes remaining, Kaylee said coldly, remaining standing. I know your KB truth. I know Thorne visited you yesterday. I know he's purchased your debts as leverage. Archie met her startled gaze. And I've visited 3 workhouses in the past 2 days. You were right about everything. The conditions, the mortality projections, the systematic cruelty disguised as charity. I was wrong. Catastrophically, publicly, unforgivably wrong. Kaylee's arms crossed defensively. And you traveled 30 miles to confess error? How noble. I came to offer you a way out from Thorne's trap. I'm listening. Archie took a steadying breath. Marriage. To me. A marriage of convenience with terms that preserve your independence. The silence stretched so long he wondered if she'd heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. You called me utterly unsuitable 3 weeks ago, in front of 300 people. You said I lacked breeding, refinement, and comprehension of my proper place. Now you're proposing marriage? I called you unsuitable to be a decorative wife. I'm not proposing decoration. He held her furious gaze. Think practically. Thorne won't accept refusal. Your debts give him leverage over your mother's security. I can pay those debts today. As my wife, you'd have financial independence, social protection, and freedom to continue your research without fear of coercion. And what do you gain? A reformed reputation? The appearance of supporting reform? Credibility as someone willing to champion actual change. Fulfillment of my mother's dying wish that I marry before I'm 40. He paused. And the knowledge that I've prevented Edmund Thorne from acquiring something, someone, he has no right to own. Kaylee paced the small space, agitation in every movement. You're describing a business arrangement. Precisely. Publicly respectable, privately separate. No expectations of marital duties. Separate bedrooms. Your research continues uninterrupted. Eventually, when it's safe, you publish under your own name. I want those terms in writing, drawn up by a solicitor. Agreed. I want genuine partnership in reform work, not you as leader and me as assistant. Equal voices. Agreed. I want the right to refuse social engagements I find pointless or morally objectionable. Within reason, agreed. Kaylee stopped pacing, studying him with those sharp eyes that saw through pretense. Why are you really doing this? Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because I can't stop thinking about your conviction even when it humiliated me. Because the world needs your mind unfettered by men like Thorne. Because it's right, he said simply. She laughed, bitter and brief. I have no better option. Thorne's deadline is in 6 days, and I won't let my mother lose her home. Her chin lifted. But understand this, Your Grace. I accept your offer as a practical solution to an impossible situation. Nothing more. Don't mistake my necessity for forgiveness. I wouldn't dream of it. We'll need a public courtship, 1 month to appear legitimate before the wedding. I'll have my solicitor draw up the contracts. Your terms, Lady Kaylee, not mine. Judith's uncle is a solicitor. He'll review everything. They stood in the book-filled room, 2 people bound by necessity and mutual calculation, neither quite meeting the other's eyes. Outside, Bristol society would soon erupt in speculation. Inside, they'd both made bargains with futures they couldn't predict. I'll call tomorrow, Archie said, to begin our courtship. How romantic, Kaylee replied dryly. News spread through Bristol like wildfire. The Duke who'd publicly humiliated her was now courting her. Shock rippled through drawing rooms. Matrons clutched their pearls. Young ladies whispered theories ranging from madness to true love to elaborate revenge. In his townhouse, Sir Edmund Thorne read the announcement in the morning paper. His teacup shattered in his hand. His investigator hovered nervously. Sir, shall I? Leave me. Alone, Thorne stared at Kaylee Blackburn's name printed beside the Duke's. His acquisition, his brilliant mind, stolen by aristocratic interference. The cold fury that followed wasn't hot or impulsive. It was calculated, patient. Edmund Thorne had built an empire by understanding one fundamental truth. Everything and everyone had a price. Everyone had a weakness. He simply needed to find the Duke of Walton's, and he had time. Plenty of time. A month-long courtship provided many opportunities for accidents, scandals, revelations that could destroy engagements. His fingers drummed against the table as plans began forming behind calculating eyes. After all, he hadn't reached this position by accepting defeat. My lovely friends, we've reached the heart of our story, the courtship that began as a charade and became something real. If you're still here, captivated by Kaylee and Archie's journey, I'm asking you to do something for the Duchess's secret. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what you think of their growing connection. These small actions help me continue creating the sweeping, emotional romances you love, and I read every single comment with joy. Bristol's Victoria Park glittered with late autumn sunlight, the perfect stage for their first public appearance. Archie offered his arm with practiced elegance, while Kaylee accepted with visible stiffness, her walking dress borrowed from Judith and hastily altered. "We must appear mutually interested," Archie murmured as they joined the promenade. "At least pretend you don't find my company torturous." "I'm trying to recall how courtship works. It's been rather thoroughly discouraged since you declared me unmarriageable." Despite himself, Archie's mouth twitched. They walked in silence, passing couples who stared with undisguised curiosity. Kaylee's observations came quietly, almost to herself. "Mrs. Pemberton's companion limps today. New shoes, probably. See how she favors the left foot? And Lord Hastings is arguing with his son again. Same tension in their shoulders as last month at the assembly." Archie glanced at her, surprised. "You notice everything." "People reveal themselves in small gestures. The trick is paying attention." She tilted her head. "You're clenching your jaw. Concerned about appearances or genuinely uncomfortable?" "Both," he admitted. Her laugh, unexpected and genuine, drew more stares. For a moment, the charade felt almost real. 3 evenings later, they worked in his estate library, papers spread across the vast mahogany desk. The reform proposal was taking shape, Kaylee's devastating statistics buttressed by Archie's understanding of parliamentary procedure. "If we frame it as economic efficiency rather than moral imperative," she said, marking calculations in the margin, "the conservative faction might actually listen. You have a gift for making compassion sound profitable." Archie leaned over to review her figures, close enough to catch the scent of ink and lavender. "These mortality projections, they're conservative?" "Tragically so. The reality is likely worse." She glanced up, finding him nearer than expected. Neither moved away. "Your tenants speak highly of you," I asked. "You investigated me?" "I investigate everything." But her tone softened. "They say you reduced rents during the agricultural depression, provided medical care when fever swept through the village." Archie shifted, uncomfortable with praise. "My mother taught me that privilege demands responsibility. She died believing I'd forgotten that lesson." He paused, surprised by his own honesty. "Perhaps I had." Kaylee's expression gentled. "My father died when I was 12, thrown from a horse during a hunt he couldn't afford to attend, trying to prove he belonged in a world that never quite accepted him. Mother never recovered from the loss." "Is that why you fight so hard? For those trapped between worlds?" "I fight because someone must." But she held his gaze. "Though I'm beginning to understand that fighting alone is exhausting." The clock chimed midnight. Margaret, serving as chaperone, had dozed in her chair by the fire. They were alone in everything but technicality, and the air between them hummed with things neither dared acknowledge. The Lord Mayor's dinner required a more convincing display. Archie found Kaylee in the estate's morning room, resplendent in a gown his aunt had insisted on providing, deep sapphire silk that transformed her from pretty to breathtaking. "We should discuss the dinner," he said, more formally than intended. "Certain expectations." "You mean we'll need to appear affectionate?" She straightened her shoulders. "I understand the requirements." "I'd like to kiss you." For appearances, with your permission. The formal request seemed to catch her off guard. She nodded, chin lifting in that defiant way he'd come to recognize as nervousness masked by courage. Archie stepped closer, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, he cupped her face gently, giving her control, letting her set the pace. The kiss began as theater, brief, chaste, appropriate for public consumption, except it wasn't brief, and the moment their lips met, something electric shot through him, unexpected and devastating. Her sharp intake of breath suggested she felt it too. For 3 heartbeats, the world contracted to this, her warmth, her softness, the way she leaned into him before catching herself. They pulled apart as though burned. That was, Kaylee's voice sounded strangled, adequate, for public consumption. Indeed. Archie stepped back, his pulse hammering. Quite adequate. They were both lying. They both knew it. The rumors began subtly, whispers at dinner parties, anonymous letters delivered to Archie's study, warning him about the adventuress who'd entrapped him through blackmail. Society matrons spoke of compromising information, suggesting Kaylee held scandalous knowledge about the Walton family. Thorne's work, obviously, but effective. "Ignore them," Archie told Kaylee when she arrived for their daily work session, her face tight with anger. "Thorne's desperate. It proves we've won." "Have we? Your peers are calling me a blackmailer. Your mother's friends question your judgment." "My mother would have adored you." He said it without thinking, then realized it was true. She'd have loved your passion for justice, your refusal to accept comfortable lies. Please, Lady Kaylee, don't let Thorne win by making you doubt this alliance. She studied him for a long moment. This alliance, is that all it is? The question hung between them, dangerous and tempting. Archie cleared his throat. "We have a petition to finish." They worked late into the night, their partnership seamless now. Moments of laughter punctuated intense debate. When Kaylee's hand brushed his reaching for the same document, neither pulled away immediately. The marriage of convenience was becoming inconvenient, charged with tension neither knew how to navigate. "You're falling for him, aren't you?" Judith asked during a private fitting for Kaylee's wedding gown. "Don't be absurd. It's a strategic partnership." Strategic partners don't blush when he enters the room, or watch the door waiting for his arrival, or smile at his terrible jokes about parliamentary procedure. Kaylee's protest died on her lips. When had it shifted? When had duty become anticipation, convenience become longing? "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "This is an arrangement. He called me unsuitable, Judith. That doesn't disappear because we can work together." "Perhaps not," Judith replied gently. "But perhaps you're both discovering what suitability actually means." In his study, Archie stared at his ledgers without seeing them. "Your Grace seems quite engaged with this arrangement," Jonathan observed, setting down the morning correspondence. "Simply ensuring the investment pays off." "Of course, Your Grace." Jonathan's knowing smile was infuriating. "The investment. Nothing whatsoever to do with how you mention Lady Kaylee at least 15 times daily, or how you've asked Cook to prepare her favorite foods, or how you stand straighter when she enters the room." "That will be all, Jonathan." "As you wish, Your Grace." Alone, Archie admitted what he'd been avoiding. The woman he'd called unsuitable had become utterly essential, and in 2 weeks they'd be married, bound by contract but separated by pride, necessity, and the devastating fear that what he felt might not be returned. The November morning broke cold and bright as Archie's carriage wound through his estate toward the tenant cottages. Kaylee sat across from him, bundled in a practical wool cloak that made her look younger, more vulnerable than the fierce reformer who'd challenged him in the assembly rooms. "They'll be wary," he warned. "Aristocratic promises have been broken before. Then we'll prove ourselves different." The cottages surprised her. Sturdy construction, proper roofs, windows that actually closed. Inside the first home, a family of 6 greeted them with careful courtesy. The father, a farm laborer named Thomas, showed them the repairs Archie had funded after last year's storms. "And the school, Your Grace," Thomas's wife added. "Our Mary can read now. Writes her letters." "May I meet Mary?" Kaylee asked. The girl emerged shyly, clutching a primer. Kaylee knelt to her level, asking about favorite stories, making the child giggle with dramatic retellings. Within minutes, she'd won not just Mary, but the entire family, speaking to them as equals, remembering names, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than aristocratic condescension. Archie watched from the doorway, something warm and fierce expanding in his chest. She belonged here, not performing charity, but building connection. The blacksmith's granddaughter understood these people in ways his breeding never could. "Your Grace chose well," Thomas murmured beside him. "Not many of quality see us as human." "I didn't choose well," Archie thought. "I stumbled into extraordinary luck and mistook it for convenience." The rainstorm caught them returning through the back roads, sudden and violent. Lightning split the sky as rain turned the path to mud. Archie urged the horses toward an abandoned gamekeeper's cottage he remembered from childhood. Inside, they dripped onto worn floorboards, shivering in the sudden cold. No servants, no chaperones. Just the 2 of them, and a space too small for pretense. "I'll build a fire," Archie said, grateful for the distraction. They worked in silence, him coaxing flames from damp wood, her wringing out her cloak. The fire caught, casting dancing shadows across walls that had witnessed decades of similar storms. Warmth slowly returned, and with it, something more dangerous than cold. "You were magnificent today," Archie said quietly. "With the families, you saw them. You funded a school, repaired their homes. Don't diminish that. Anyone with money could do that." He stared into the flames. "What you did, making them feel valued, that requires something I'm not sure I possess." "What do you mean?" The question opened something in him, some locked chamber he'd never meant to expose. Perhaps it was the isolation, or the storm, or simply that he was tired of performing. "My parents died when I was 22. Carriage accident. One moment I was a second son studying at Oxford. The next I was Duke of Walton with tenants, estates, parliamentary responsibilities." He rubbed his face. "Everyone told me what to say, how to act, which causes to support. I learned to perform the role so well I forgot who I was beneath it. Sometimes I wonder if I'm capable of genuine connection or just performance." Kaylee moved closer, her wet skirts rustling. "You think this is performance? Today, with your tenants? The way you've thrown yourself into reform work?" "I don't know anymore." He met her eyes. "Until I met you, I'd convinced myself performance was enough. And now? Now I'm terrified." The admission escaped before he could stop it. "Terrified that what I feel is real, and you see it as strategic. Terrified that I've become what I swore never to be, a man bound by duty rather than choice." Kaylee's hand found his, ink-stained fingers lacing through his. "I'm terrified too, that I'm unworthy of your world, that your peers see only blacksmith's blood when they look at me, that this is a beautiful dream I'll wake from when you remember what you called me. Your blood matters less than your mind and heart. He cupped her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Kaylee, Your Grace. Lady Kaylee!" Jonathan's voice shattered the moment. The rescue party had found them. Torches blazed outside, servants materialized with blankets, and the intimate cocoon of confession evaporated. They separated quickly, but not quickly enough. Jonathan's knowing look said everything. By tomorrow, Bristol society would be speculating about what happened in that cottage. More ammunition for gossips, more danger from Thorne. Sir Edmund Thorne's investigators spread documents across the desk, surveillance notes tracking Kaylee's continued meetings with factory workers, dates and times meticulously recorded. "And the forger?" Thorne asked. "Creating the letter as we speak. It will appear to be from Lady Kaylee to a known radical group, discussing direct action against industrial interests." "Perfect. Hold it until the optimal moment," Thorne smiled. "Let them think they're safe first. The fall is sweeter from greater heights." The Dowager Duchess's summons came the next morning. They sat in her drawing room while she paced, agitation unusual for her careful composure. "Thorne is investigating you both. He's documenting Kaylee's meetings, building a narrative of sedition. Worse, he's hired a forger to create evidence of radical connections." Kaylee went pale. "He's going to expose me as a revolutionary?" "He's planning something catastrophic. My sources suggest he'll act at your wedding or immediately before." The Dowager fixed them both with sharp eyes. "You need to accelerate, marry sooner, secure legal protections before he strikes." "We need more time," Kaylee protested. "Time is a luxury you don't have." The Dowager's voice softened. "I know this isn't the romance either of you deserves, but survival sometimes requires pragmatism." They left in troubled silence. The weight of rushing toward a marriage neither felt prepared for pressing down on both. That evening, Archie found Kaylee in his conservatory, surrounded by exotic plants his mother had collected. She stood before a climbing rose, fingers gentle on its thorns. "This arrangement has become," he began. "Complicated?" She didn't turn around. "Profoundly. I find myself—" He stepped closer. "Kaylee, I need to tell you." "Your Grace! Lady Kaylee!" Jonathan burst in, apologetic but urgent. "The parliamentary committee. They've requested testimony about workhouse reforms. Both of you are invited to speak." The moment shattered. Opportunity and danger combined, the chance to make real change, but also exposure at precisely the wrong time. Kaylee met Archie's eyes across the conservatory. Everything unsaid hung between them, precious and precarious as the roses surrounding them. "We'll testify," Archie decided. "Together." Whatever came next, they'd face it as partners. Even if neither dared admit they'd already become something more. The week before testimony consumed them. Archie's study became their war room. Papers everywhere, tea growing cold, candles burning past midnight. He taught her parliamentary protocol, the unwritten rules of address and deference that governed power. She taught him something more important: how statistics became stories, how numbers translated to broken families and preventable deaths. "You can't just present data," she insisted during their fourth late session. "You must make them feel the 7-year-old child's bleeding fingers, the mother separated from her infant, the elderly man dying alone because efficiency demanded it." Archie watched her pace, passion animating every gesture. When exhaustion finally claimed her voice, he brought tea without asking. When he fumbled with his cravat before their practice session, she crossed the room to straighten it, her fingers lingering at his collar longer than necessary. These small intimacies, the ones witnesses never saw, were becoming the truest part of their arrangement. The night before testimony, Archie found Kaylee in the library at 2 in the morning, surrounded by papers but staring at nothing. "Can't sleep?" She startled. "I keep thinking I'll say something wrong. Hurt your reputation further. Give them reason to dismiss everything we've worked for." He sat beside her on the settee. "Kaylee, you're the best thing that's happened to my reputation. Before you, I was a title without purpose. You gave me something worth defending. This arrangement," she stopped, struggling with words, "has become real," he finished quietly. "For me, at least. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know." Urgent knocking interrupted. Jonathan entered, his face grave, carrying a sealed envelope. "Your Grace, this was just delivered to the committee chair. I have sources in his household." He hesitated. "You need to see this now." The forged letter was masterfully done. Kaylee's handwriting, her distinctive phrasing, addressed to a known radical group promising to destroy aristocracy from within once she became Duchess. Inflammatory language about direct action, seditious intent, betrayal of her class. "It's brilliant," Archie said coldly. "Delivered the night before testimony, no time to properly investigate. The committee chair is Thorne's political ally." He looked up at Kaylee's stricken face. "This was always his endgame. Not to stop our testimony, but to destroy you publicly first." "He's demanding an inquiry," Jonathan added. "If it proceeds, Lady Kaylee would be arrested. The engagement dissolved." Archie stood, his mind calculating rapidly. "Then we counterattack. Jonathan, bring me everything we have on Thorne. Everything. We end this tomorrow." The parliamentary chamber hummed with tension when they arrived. Archie felt it immediately, the hostile whispers, the averted gazes, the trap closing around them. Kaylee's hand trembled on his arm. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "I stand with you." The committee chair gavelled for attention, his expression grave and performative. "Before we proceed to testimony on workhouse reform, concerning evidence has emerged that must be addressed. Evidence suggesting seditious intent." Sir Edmund Thorne rose from the industrialist section, regret painted across his features like stage makeup. "Mr. Chairman, I wish I didn't have to bring this forward, but investigating radical activity among my own factory workers, I discovered this letter." He produced it with theatrical reluctance. "I believe this chamber deserves to know if the Duke of Walton's intended bride seeks to destroy the very institutions she'd be sworn to uphold." He read portions aloud, the most inflammatory sections, designed for maximum damage. Gasps rippled through observers. The committee chairman demanded formal inquiry. If it proceeded, everything they'd built would crumble. Archie rose with devastating calm. "Mr. Chairman, I appreciate Sir Edmund's theatrical presentation. However, I must inform this chamber that I anticipated precisely this move." He gestured to Jonathan, who began distributing documents. "The letter is a forgery, created by the same copyist Sir Edmund employed for fraudulent contracts in 1892, case documented in Bristol Civil Court." Thorne's face drained of color. "Furthermore," Archie continued, his voice carrying to every corner, "I present testimony from 3 women who escaped Sir Edmund's employment. Women who describe a pattern of coercion, threats, and violence remarkably similar to what he attempted with Lady Kaylee." 3 women stood, respectable now, but bearing scars Thorne had inflicted. Their testimony, delivered with quiet dignity, detailed systematic abuse. Then came the devastating revelation. Documents suggesting suspicious circumstances surrounding the deaths of Thorne's first 2 wives. The chamber erupted. Thorne tried to leave, but parliamentary guards blocked the doors on the chairman's order. Archie delivered his final strike. Testimonials from 12 MPs praising KB Truth's research, including 3 members of this very committee. "Gentlemen," Archie said, his voice cutting through chaos, "if brilliant truth-telling makes her unsuitable, if passion for justice marks her as seditious, then this chamber has mistaken integrity for treason. Lady Kaylee Blackburn possesses more honor in her ink-stained fingers than many born to titles. I am proud, profoundly proud, to call her my intended wife." The committee chairman, political winds shifting, called for investigation into Thorne instead. Guards escorted the industrialist out as he sputtered protests. The chamber slowly settled. "Now," the chairman said weakly, "shall we hear testimony on workhouse reform?" Kaylee spoke with passionate precision, her voice steady despite the ordeal. She presented statistics on child mortality, 300 projected deaths in year 1, and dissected the economic fallacies underlying Somerton's scheme. Her research was irrefutable, her logic devastating. When Archie corroborated with first-hand observations from his workhouse visits, describing bleeding fingers and separated families, the committee leaned forward. Here was a duke who'd stepped outside his privilege to witness truth. Here was a partnership of intellect and position that could actually change things. Their collaboration was evident to everyone watching. The way she deferred to his political knowledge, the way he elevated her expertise, the way they moved through complex arguments like dancers who'd rehearsed for years rather than weeks. When the questioning finally ended, the committee chair announced the reform bill would receive favorable recommendation. Not a guarantee, but a beginning. Real change, made possible by 2 people who'd been forced together by necessity and discovered something far more powerful. They left the chamber to whispers of a different kind: admiration, respect, hope. Outside, Kaylee's composure finally cracked. She sagged against the wall, trembling with relief and delayed shock. "We did it," Archie said softly. "You did it. You saved me." "No." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "We saved each other. That's what partners do." And there, in the parliamentary corridor with history being made around them, Archie finally said what had been building for weeks. "I love you. This stopped being an arrangement the moment you straightened my cravat, and I realized I'd found something I didn't know I'd been searching for." Kaylee's eyes filled with tears. "You called me unsuitable. I was spectacularly wrong about everything that matters." He smiled, vulnerable in ways he'd never allowed himself. "Will you marry me? Not for protection or convenience, but because I cannot imagine my life making sense without you in it?" She kissed him instead of answering, fierce and certain, and entirely unsuitable for a parliamentary hallway. Neither of them cared. The carriage ride back to the estate passed in trembling silence. Adrenaline drained from Kaylee's body, leaving exhaustion and something more dangerous: vulnerability. She'd held herself together through testimony, through Thorne's attack, through public exposure of her identity. Now, alone with Archie, her composure fractured. Her hand shook on her lap. He covered it with his own, deliberately, intimately, without pretense of propriety. "You were magnificent today." "We were magnificent," she corrected softly. "Together." His thumb traced circles on her palm. Neither spoke again, but the silence thrummed with everything they'd said in that corridor. Everything that couldn't be unsaid. The estate erupted with celebration when news of parliamentary victory spread. Staff gathered in the hall, congratulating them with genuine warmth. Cook had prepared a feast. Jonathan wore an expression that might have been a smile on a less dignified face. But Archie and Kaylee moved through it like ghosts, too much unsaid between them, too raw to navigate public joy. When propriety allowed, they separated to their respective rooms to change for dinner. Kaylee stood before her mirror, still wearing her testimony gown, and tried to understand what had shifted. He'd said he loved her. She'd kissed him in response. But in the carriage, neither had mentioned it, as if speaking the words aloud might shatter something precious and terrifying. Sleep proved impossible. Near midnight, she abandoned her room for the library, seeking comfort in books when her mind wouldn't quiet. She found Archie already there, still dressed, pretending to read a volume he hadn't turned a page in since she'd entered. They stared at each other across the room, two people who'd faced down Parliament but couldn't navigate their own hearts. "I couldn't sleep either," he said unnecessarily. Kaylee sat in the chair opposite his, the fire crackling between them. The tension was unbearable, electric and suffocating at once. Finally, she broke. "Why are you really doing all this?" "What do you mean?" "The legal protection, the parliamentary defense, risking your reputation to save mine. Our agreement didn't include what you did today, didn't require you to publicly declare pride in me, to investigate Thorne for weeks, to—" She stopped, her voice catching. "Why, Archie?" He set down his unread book with careful precision. When he met her gaze, something in his eyes made her breath catch. "It started because I was wrong. Catastrophically, publicly wrong. And I needed to correct that." He stood, moving closer. "Then it became admiration. For your courage, your brilliant mind, the way you see injustice and refuse to look away." "And now?" she whispered. "Now it's love." The words fell into the quiet room like stones into still water. "I love you, Kaylee. I realized it watching you with my tenants, seeing you speak to them as equals when you could have performed charity. I knew it with certainty when you straightened my cravat, and I understood I wanted you touching me like that, casually, intimately, for the rest of my life." He knelt before her chair, taking her hands. "Everything unsuitable about you by their standards is perfect by mine. Your blacksmith's blood means you understand what they never will. Your ink-stained fingers prove you work for justice rather than applause. Your refusal to accept your proper place is what makes you extraordinary." Tears spilled down Kaylee's cheeks. "I'm terrified. You're a duke with Plantagenet blood. I'm the woman I love, the only woman I want." His hands tightened on hers. "Society's acceptance doesn't matter. Their rules don't define us." "This can't work," he interrupted with a kiss, not the performative kiss from the Lord Mayor's dinner, not the desperate corridor kiss after testimony. This was different, passionate and tender, desperate and patient, honest in ways neither had allowed before. Weeks of denied attraction poured into it, walls crumbling, pretense burning away. They broke apart breathless, foreheads pressed together. "This complicates everything," Kaylee managed. Everything was already complicated. Archie's smile was shaky. "The question is whether we stop pretending we can keep this merely strategic." "I've loved you since the workhouse visits," she confessed in a rush. "Watching you truly see people you'd been taught to overlook. Seeing you question everything you'd accepted without thought. I was terrified of ruining our partnership with this. Then we were both terrified of the same thing." He cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears. What do we do now? Stop pretending. She kissed him again, softer this time. Make this real, in every sense. They sat together on the floor before the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, touching with the casual intimacy they'd both craved but denied themselves. Tomorrow's ceremony, Archie said quietly. It's protection and strategy, legal necessity and social obligation, but he pulled back to meet her eyes. What if we had something just for us, before the public spectacle? What do you mean? Let me marry you tonight. Private ceremony at the estate chapel. No audience, no politics, no strategy. Just us choosing each other because we want to, not because we must. Kaylee's heart stuttered. You want to marry me twice? I want to marry you for the right reasons first. His voice roughened with emotion. Tomorrow we'll perform for society. Tonight, let's make promises that mean something. She thought of everything they'd been through, the assembly humiliation, the parliamentary trap, the weeks of dancing around feelings neither dared name. They'd been forced together by necessity and found something far more precious than convenience. Yes, she whispered. Tonight. For us. The estate chapel stood silent under November stars. The vicar, summoned hastily and sworn to discretion, waited near the altar. No guests, no musicians, no flowers beyond what grew wild in the chapel garden. Just Kaylee in the sapphire gown she'd worn to testimony, and Archie in shirt sleeves, both of them choosing authenticity over performance. Jonathan and Judith stood as witnesses, the secretary who'd seen everything coming, and the friend who'd never stopped believing. When the vicar asked if they came freely to this union, both answered without hesitation, I do. When Archie slipped his mother's ring onto Kaylee's finger, his hands were steady. When she repeated vows promising partnership and love, her voice never wavered. The kiss that sealed their marriage was private, tender, and entirely theirs. Outside, society prepared for tomorrow's spectacle. Inside the chapel, two people who'd been called unsuitable for each other created something perfect. Choosing love when they could have settled for strategy, building forever when they'd planned for convenience. Hello, wife, Archie murmured against her hair. Kaylee smiled into his shoulder. Hello, husband. I suppose we should warn Bristol society what they're in for. Tomorrow. He tightened his arms around her. Tonight, you're just mine, and I'm just yours. Everything else can wait. In the flickering candlelight, surrounded by witnesses who loved them, they began their forever, not with fanfare, but with quiet truth. Sometimes the most unsuitable matches become the most extraordinary marriages. Dear ones, as we reach the beautiful conclusion of this unsuitable love story, I hope your hearts are as full as mine. If Kaylee and Archie's journey has touched you, if you felt their triumph over judgment and pride, would you honor their story by subscribing to the Duchess's Secret? Leave a like, drop a comment about your favorite moment. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. Your engagement is what allows me to keep bringing you these tales of love that refuses to be contained by society's rules. Dawn broke soft and golden over the Blackburn Cottage chapel. Inside, 6 people gathered, witnesses to something precious and private. Margaret dabbed her eyes. The Dowager Duchess sat ramrod straight, her expression tender for once. Jonathan and Judith stood side by side, their own glances growing warmer by the day. Kaylee wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, carrying history into her future. The simple gold bands they'd purchased together gleamed on the altar. When the vicar asked for their vows, Archie's voice was steady and sure. I love you not despite your unsuitability, but because everything that makes you unsuitable by their standards makes you perfect by mine. Your courage, your brilliant mind, your refusal to accept injustice. These are not flaws to overlook, but gifts to cherish. I vow to spend my life proving worthy of you. Kaylee's eyes shimmered with tears. I love you for becoming the man I hoped you could be while remaining yourself, for questioning everything you'd accepted, for choosing justice over comfort, for seeing people others overlook. I vow to challenge you, support you, and love you exactly as you are. Their kiss as truly married couple tasted of morning light and forever promises. Breakfast at the cottage was laughter and joy, intimacy unguarded, the four witnesses celebrating love that had conquered pride and circumstance. But society demanded its own ceremony. By afternoon, Walton Estate gleamed with transformation. Kaylee had insisted on choices that broke every convention: her mother's dress rather than elaborate gown, guest lists including factory workers and tenant families, the women who'd testified against Thorne seated in places of honor. They'll be scandalized, Margaret worried. Good, Kaylee replied. Let them see what we value. St. Michael's Church overflowed with curiosity and genuine goodwill. When Kaylee walked the aisle, confident, no longer apologizing for her existence, whispers rippled through the crowd. She'd been called unsuitable in this very city. Now she walked toward a duke who looked at her like she held all the answers to questions he'd finally learned to ask. The ceremony was traditional but infused with personal touches. When they exchanged rings for the second time that day, their smiles held secrets only they understood. At the wedding breakfast, Archie rose for his toast. The room fell silent. I once called Lady Kaylee Blackburn unsuitable. His voice carried to every corner. I was catastrophically, publicly, unforgivably wrong. She was unsuitable only for a world that values appearance over substance, breeding over character, silent compliance over courageous truth. That world is dying, and I for one will not mourn it. We're building something better, a world where worth is measured by what you give, not what you inherit. Before anyone could respond, Kaylee stood, breaking tradition, as always. My husband speaks of suitability as though it's his to grant. Her voice was warm but firm. True suitability isn't about meeting someone else's standards. It's about having the courage to speak truth when silence would be easier, to choose justice when comfort beckons, to build bridges when walls would be safer. She met gazes around the room, aristocrats and workers, reformers and skeptics. We're all unsuitable for the old world. Let's build one where we fit. Applause began uncertain, scattered. Then it built, thunderous, transformative, hopeful. The wedding breakfast deliberately mixed social classes. Tenant families dined with aristocrats. Former factory workers shared tables with MPs. Thomas's daughter Mary sat between a countess and a mill worker, both listening raptly as she explained her studies. Judith and Jonathan stood together by the terrace, their conversation animated. Margaret cried happy tears with the Dowager Duchess. Two women from different worlds united by love for the couple they'd helped create. It was a symbol, messy and imperfect but genuine, of the world Archie and Kaylee were building. When they took the floor for their first dance, the partnership was evident. Perfect synchronization, natural rhythm, two people who'd learned to move as one. Happy? Archie murmured, deliriously. Kaylee smiled up at him. Still think I'm occasionally insufferable? Always. But you're my insufferable Duchess now. Their kiss drew applause that became cheers. Let society talk. Let them speculate. This love needed no one's approval, but theirs. 1 year later. The Walton estates had transformed into a model of reformed practices. Fair wages, limited hours, schools for workers' children, profit sharing that gave families stake in their own future. Other estates were beginning to follow, slowly, but the tide was turning. Truth's pamphlets now published openly under both names, the Duchess of Walton and her Duke, partnership made literal. The Parliamentary Reform Bill had passed. Children's working hours were limited, workhouse conditions regulated. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. In the library where they'd confessed love a year ago, Kaylee sat surrounded by books, visibly pregnant, working on their latest reform proposal. Archie entered with tea, his hand immediately going to her rounded belly. "The little radical is active today," he observed as movement rippled under his palm. "Takes after their mother." Kaylee leaned into his touch. "We should discuss names and their future. Boy or girl, they'll know both worlds," Archie said firmly. Taught that suitability is defined by character, not birth. That courage matters more than compliance. That love, real love, demands you become better while accepting who you are. "You've become quite the philosopher, Your Grace." "I married a woman who refuses to let me be comfortable. Philosophy was inevitable." They reviewed their proposal together. Easy partnership, gentle teasing, love deepened by time and shared purpose. Outside, workers left fields for reasonable hours. Children attended school. Margaret lived comfortably in the cottage, writing her own memoirs. Judith and Jonathan's courtship had become the estate's favorite gossip. The portrait painter arrived to capture them for posterity, the Duke and Duchess, who'd scandalized society and changed it. As Kaylee positioned herself, she caught Archie's eye. "Still think I'm unsuitable?" His answering smile was everything. "More unsuitable every day, thank God." Their kiss as sunset painted the library gold would be immortalized in that portrait. The unsuitable Duchess and the Duke who'd been brave enough to see her. So ends our tale of love found in unlikely circumstances, of two people who defied expectation to build something extraordinary. She was never unsuitable. She was waiting for someone brave enough to truly see her, and he was waiting for someone courageous enough to challenge him to become better. Their story reminds us that the right love doesn't require us to shrink. It invites us to grow. It transforms judgment into understanding, pride into partnership, duty into joy. Until our next story, remember this: you are never unsuitable for the right person. The right love sees your brilliance when others see only your difference. It celebrates your courage when others demand your silence. It chooses you not despite who you are, but because of it. May you all find a love that calls you suitable exactly as you are, and may you have the courage to choose it when it comes. Until next time, lovelies.